Hard to believe this is already going to bring us to a third of the way through the Orange football season. This is the final game of September when Holy Cross visits the Dome. It's a nooner in the Dome to wrap up September. And with that, we're now going to bring on our next guest. He is Kevin Gehl. He calls Holy Cross games for ESPN Plus, among many other things. Kevin, welcome in. Thanks for hopping on to talk some Crusaders with us today.
I am so thrilled that I'm on the radio talking about Holy Cross football in the month of June. We can't wait to turn the page to this fall, and let this be fair warning now. Holy Cross has gotten a taste for FBS blood. If you look back at the last three seasons, a win at UConn, a win at Buffalo, and a win ripped away last year in Chestnut Hill on the road at BC, a 2.5-hour lightning delay. I was there in Chestnut Hill. I looked around. I didn't see any of that lightning, so they sent Matt Sluka and the Crusaders in the locker room. They were driving down to win that game late. They come out of a long break and fumble it away. So they've been very close to pulling that ACC road upset, and I know Dan Curran and his new staff think that they could have a shot to get that ACC win in the Dome.
Well, that is one disconcerting that they're gunning for it, but I do like I like a lightning delay conspiracy. That has intrigued me, Kevin. So there we are. BC with shenanigans. All right, so there has been
what you have to understand is that Boston College and Holy Cross hate each other, and it's a rivalry that goes back 100 years here in this area. And the fact that they've been separated FCS and FBS has left some old scores kind of boiling over. And so what was so interesting about that game is Holy Cross fans felt very slighted, and they showed out that day because after that lightning delay, about 90% of the crowd, you can go back and look at the photos, 90% of the crowd in Chestnut Hill was wearing purple at that point. So it really did feel like it was a home game, and it literally just slipped through their fingers. So an opportunity lost. I know Matt Sluka calls that, one of the real missed opportunities of his magnificent career. And I think the change at quarterback this year is really going to be one of the big storylines that we'll examine.
We'll be talking about Matt Sluka next week, ironically, because he transferred out to UNLV, and that is Syracuse's game after Holy Cross. Go figure. So kind of weird stuff you can't make up. Not as much animosity between Syracuse and Holy Cross as Holy Cross and BC, other than the last time we talk about Holy Cross being involved in like major football. Gordy Lockbaum came in third in the '87 Heisman. Don McPherson, who was robbed of it by Tim Brown of Syracuse, came in second. So they were both there in New York City for that back in '87. But Kevin, a lot has happened here with Holy Cross and some weird, almost ties with Syracuse. We spent like a week talking about the potential that Bob Chesney, the coach last year, was potentially going to be Syracuse's next coach. Then obviously it didn't happen, and Fran Brown got hired, and then Chesney ends up leaving for James Madison, and go figure, like one of his potential dream jobs in Boston College ends up actually opening a few weeks after that. So there's a lot of weird machinations. How did that all go down in your mind with Chesney, who had such great success, and now he's out the door and has been replaced?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, most Holy Cross fans feel like they stole an extra season with Bob Chesney. I mean, he had so many great opportunities to make a jump either to, let's say, a more moneyed or power FCS program. He held off for FBS. And so after winning 3 straight Patriot League titles, there was some expectations that might be the time to jump, but a realization set in that, Matt Sluka could be the best dual threat quarterback, not just in FCS, but arguably anywhere in the country with his development. You had a full offensive line coming back. You have a great backfield, a defense that had been a little banged up, but led by an outstanding linebacker in Jacob Dobbs. So Chesney said, let's run it back again, and ended up rattling off 5 titles in a row. No other team in FCS or FBS had rattled off 5 straight league titles in a row. So going into the offseason, everyone was kind of resigned to the fact that Chesney was going to jump on one of these opportunities. And I truly believe James Madison has the best diamond in the rough coach in the country with this hire. Now, what was so interesting about this was BC fans thought for sure there'd be a quick move to remove Hafley at the end of the season. Maybe he wouldn't even make it through the season. BC had a nice rally mid-season to show some spunk. but there wasn't really much of a long-term commitment to what Hafley was doing in Chestnut Hill. So Hafley got ahead of it and decided he would take a job with the Green Bay Packers. And to your point, what was so unfortunate for a guy like Bob Chesney, who I know and has said, and I believe him, that he's very happy at James Madison, he could have stayed in the same home. His family has lived in Worcester for a decade. Don't forget, he was at Division II Assumption, right down the street from Holy Cross before he made that jump. So he could have kept his family in place. He could have commuted to the office in Chestnut Hill. Now he ends up at JMU, and you can just see it with James Madison. They really feel like they may have stolen one of the best coaching prospects. And Holy Cross had to make a tough move, handing the reins off quickly to someone else to keep the momentum. And they went right up the highway here in the Boston area to Merrimack College, a school that upset Holy Cross a couple years ago. Dan Curran, who always said that his parents wanted him to go to Holy Cross. He was an outstanding running back here in Massachusetts as a high schooler. And the only reason he ended up at UNH was there was a young assistant coach there on offense at that time named Chip Kelly, who said, why don't you come to New Hampshire? And that really set in with Dan Curran. So you could say he's from that Chip Kelly coaching tree, and he's going to really dial up the offense this year.
Yeah, I mean, Chip Kelly obviously now at Ohio State after Oregon. I mean, UCLA, we know the whole story of Chip Kelly, but yeah, it did start at New Hampshire. Go figure. So, yeah, you mentioned Dan Curran, and he's kind of, he is kind of a Bob Chesney type, right? From the smaller schools, you said Merrimack, for those, locally here, Lemoyne and Merrimack, both doing the same thing and moving up to the NEC level kind of recently from D2, so they're on similar tracks for a local program here. But what is Dan Curran, and how, does he fit in the mold of a Chesney, I guess, to keep the role going that Holy Cross has been on here for the last 5 years or so?
Absolutely. They are a great fit in the sense that they do it all. And at this level of FCS, you have to do more with less. Now, Merrimack is even a step down the ladder from Holy Cross. Holy Cross has a tremendous alumni base all over the Northeast, really prominent business alums, and they have a good donor base that they can rely on. Merrimack was a Division II football program just a handful of years ago, and they burst onto the scene, played really well, independent, jumped into the NEC. They made some noise right away. They've been having trouble finding a conference home for football just because it is, to your point, a little spotty up here with teams that they can play against. But at one point last season, when Dan Curran was in town coaching Merrimack in a loss against Holy Cross, he essentially told us he was the head coach, he was the play caller, he was coaching tight ends, he was basically doing 4 or 5 jobs, maybe even 6 or 7 at an FBS program, and he was doing it all himself. So he's not afraid to roll up his sleeves. He's a former player. He had to grind it out, got some opportunities as a pro player, running out of the backfield, hard-nosed, can throw like weight around in the gym like you wouldn't even believe. So, he's going to be motivating players on the strength and conditioning side, but he understands the assignment. He's a Massachusetts guy, and he's been able to prevent players from jumping in the portal. That's what's been so interesting about Holy Cross, is they don't have a lot of the bells and whistles of larger programs. They certainly don't have NIL money to throw around like larger programs. But even when Bob Chesney stepped out to go to this next opportunity at James Madison, and we thought, boy, everyone's going to be hopping in the portal, he kept the roster intact. And that's what's so exciting about this upcoming season. There's a lot of new names, but not new to us who have been following the program. They have a lot of continuity, and there's an expectation that with the schedule built the way it is, they could pick up right where they left off and compete right away in the Patriot League for a title.
And obviously, the one main change on the field will have to be a quarterback, as Sluka has moved on to UNLV for this season. So where is that? Because obviously when you have one of the best dual threat guys at that level in the country, that feels like, anyway, on the face of it, is a big thing to try to replace this year.
It's so interesting. I'm actually a Mizzou alum, and Barry Odom was the head coach at Mizzou. And he did not have a good time of it. He was following Gary Pinkel. They had some violations to work through. It was not the best time for Missouri football. Eli Drinkwitz has taken the ball and run with it ever since he came from Appalachian State. They've really embraced NIL and the future of college sports. So Barry Odom slowly steps away and sort of pops back up in the desert at UNLV, a program that had been suffering for a long time. They were playing in empty stadiums. They were trying to see if maybe Allegiant Stadium where the Raiders play could be a home. And they created an atmosphere. They won some games there last year. They have a little buzz in town. And then they go out and they pick up Matt Sluka, who I think is a perfect fit for a program like UNLV. And your Orange are going to see this firsthand. He can make something out of nothing. And the one thing, like the development of every player we hear, he had all the athletic gifts. He was actually a lacrosse player. He had better offers to play D1 lacrosse up and down the Northeast corridor. But he said, you know what, I like football better, and I'll go figure it out. And he was kind of thrown into the fire during the COVID season. Connor Dagenhart was the starting quarterback, more traditional drop-back passer, couldn't create enough for himself. And Bob Chesney said, what the heck, we're only playing 4 games. Let's send Sluka out there and see what we got. And he never gave the job back. And since then, he's just developed his arm. He's become more patient. He still won't protect himself. They say, let Sluka be Sluka. He's going to dive head first for first downs. He's going to throw his body into the pile. And that's what's going to make him so explosive and dangerous for UNLV. Now, what's Holy Cross going to do? Joe Pazanski has been waiting behind Matt Sluka, and he finally got his opportunity last year at Fordham. Sluka finally got himself into an injury, and they put Joe Pazanski out there, and he threw the ball like wild in an absolutely thrilling win at Fordham. That's been the best game in the Patriot League the last 3 seasons now. Absolute classic every time the Rams and Crusaders get together for the Ram Crusader Cup. I'm excited to see what Joe can do with his arm. The offensive line has had so much continuity. They lost a key piece in C.J. Hansen, who's the first Holy Cross player drafted since the 1980s. He's on his way to a championship caliber program with the Kansas City Chiefs. I think you might see him get a couple opportunities as a reserve center. So there's going to be a little bit of turnover along that line, but the one thing that Holy Cross has really been able to follow success year in and year out is along that offensive line, protect Joe Pazanski at quarterback, and then they've got a really good running back in Jordan Fuller coming back. His dad, Jerome, arguably the best running back playmaker not named Gordy Lockbaum in the history of Holy Cross football. I mean, he was a dynamite player. Jordan's been breaking some of his dad's old records. So he's going to get a heavy workload. Pazanski's going to take the top off the defense a little bit more, whereas Sluka had to do it as a surprise. Pazanski can pick apart a secondary, and I think that's what's going to make them, I don't want to say more dangerous this year, but maybe a little less predictable in the way that, hey, we know we have to line up and stop Sluka. This year, I think Holy Cross is going to have to get a little bit more creative in Dan Curran's offense to find other ways to get the ball to different playmakers and sort of stretch the field out in different ways, because Jalen Coker, their record-setting receiver, went undrafted and signed with the Panthers. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen Coker becomes sort of the next 53-man guy who could really surprise in Carolina, because we know the Panthers are desperate to find some playmakers right now.
Yeah, they need anybody resembling an NFL player in Carolina right now. All right, Kevin, last thing for you as we're doing our 12 teams in 12 weeks preview for the Syracuse football season. We're talking about Game 4 for the Orange against Holy Cross is the final game of September in the Dome. You mentioned some of the games recently playing BC and all that. How often does Holy Cross step up and play, a power level program? Is it regularly? Is it not? Like, how often is it a step up to this level for them?
That's a good question. They have been trying to get at least 1 or 2 FBS programs on the schedule every single year. And it's happening more and more, because I think the key moment in time was, you go back and look at 2018. This was very early in the Bob Chesney turnaround. And I mean, Holy Cross had great success in previous eras, in the 80s and early 90s. But, these were times when Holy Cross was not a national brand. There were years when, they didn't compete in the national 1AA tournament. So maybe some of their greatness was deferred just because the Patriot League was really built to be more like the Ivy League. But things started to change with the way that the Patriot League is now offering more scholarships. They compete in the national tournament now. They get an automatic bid. And you have to remember, in 2018, Holy Cross got throttled at Boston College 62-14, and last year they had that team dead to rights. I mean, that's essentially, we joke about it here at the college. We say that's a win that just doesn't show up on the record book. So the new expectation was set with the road wins I mentioned at UConn and Buffalo. I know these aren't, ACC programs, but since then, there's been a hope and an expectation that more teams like Syracuse would step up to the plate, give Holy Cross an opportunity, because we all know, right, good teams at the FCS level, South Dakota State, I don't know how welcome they are back in Iowa City anytime soon. I mean, you invite one of these teams in and get embarrassed, that's tough, and you're going to hear it from the fan base. So I admire Syracuse for scheduling this game. I think Holy Cross will show up very well. That's a trip that a lot of alums around the New York and tri-state area can make the drive to. So I think there's going to be a lot of excitement here, and they're going to embrace the challenge. I think it'll also give Holy Cross enough time to sort of figure out what their offense is going to look like under Dan Curran, and maybe how they could be as explosive as possible. The one question is going to be defense. Can they make enough stops? They got exposed by some teams that they had bullied in years past, the likes of like a Lafayette, who was the surprise last year and should have gotten a win at Delaware in the national tournament. So there were some question marks defensively, but I'm really excited to see what this season has in store, because I think this is a great test for Holy Cross, and I know Syracuse is not going to take that one lightly, because we've learned in this day and age there are just so many more teams now that can sneak up and bite you, especially from the FCS level.
Yeah, that'll be noon September 28th in the Dome. Holy Cross actually doing a back-to-back CNY weeks. They'll be at Colgate the week after that. So there we are. All right, Kevin, great to chat. I'm sure we'll do this again as we get much, much closer to the game. But thanks for partaking in our 12 games preview of Syracuse football. Thanks for hopping on today.
Anytime. Thanks so much. Go Cross, go.
There he is, Kevin Gehl, telling us a little bit about the Crusaders. So, again, that game will be September 28th in the Dome at noon. Imagine there'll be more than a little splash of purple in the Dome that day for Syracuse and Holy Cross. Yeah, going back, 1987, Don McPherson, number 2 in the Heisman voting. Tim Brown. Gordy Lockbaum of Holy Cross was number 3. Oh, yes, a Holy Cross Crusader in 1987 came in 3rd in the Heisman Trophy race. That got robbed from Don McPherson. So there we are, all time. Gordy was number 5 the year before. How about that? Holy Cross, back-to-back top 5 finishes in the Heisman Trophy in the not too distant past. It's getting more distant. The not too distant past, it's been a minute. All right, we'll take a break. We'll come back.